Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $4 million and counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1,500,000 worth of aid to more than 1,500 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Coming to us all the way, I say that often, it is kind of far. Not really that far. Well, yeah, it's far. It's like midway from Brownton, Minnesota, which is west of the Twin Cities. For those that aren't familiar with, I, I love Minnesota. I've been there a lot, as we mentioned before we hit record here with our guest. It's just a really cool area, and I know you just had a recent move to get closer to a lake. There's what's Minnesota? The land of the lakes, I think, or the thousand lakes, I think, is what the
Land of
saying.
10,000. Yep,
10,000.
10,000 leagues.
Yeah. Yeah. But Rita Krueger, welcome to the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, how's the weather there right now, Minnesota? And is it,
It's kind of gloomy at the moment. It's been very mild though this fall. We have
yeah.
not yet received any snowfall. It's been in highs in the 50s, and then they're telling us it's going to be dropping pretty quick here. So it'll be down to the 25 or so for highs in the next week or so.
I know there's parts. So, I remember going out there the first time, and yeah, the winters are brutal, but the winters here in New England are pretty brutal too. Like, we get those, the nor'easters, which you guys don't really get nor'easters. You get that kind of the lake effect, I guess, or it comes down from Canada in some parts.
Mhm.
But it's kind of fascinating. Like, I think people here in the New England area think like, oh my God, like Minnesota, like it snows like, 10 months of the year, and but from going out there, that's not the case. But I will say this. I remember one of my trips one year, I like flew in late at night and I was in Minneapolis, so preface that. And I ended up going to the gym in the morning, and it did snow overnight. But like by the time I went to the gym at 5 in the morning, like the streets were clear. Like so, like I think like that part of the country is very good with snow removal and does a very good job. Like I know there's a great trail system through the Twin Cities for a lot of the runners and walkers. And I think in the wintertime, they've got like people out there that clear off the walks. And then just you guys are resilient. You figure ways
Yeah.
out how to deal with the snow. Whether that's like, snowshoeing or cross country skiing on those trails or, in the northern parts as well. But just a beautiful part of the country. First part of this podcast is always our guest opportunity, Rita. We certainly hope that your friends and family do listen to this, but we've got a pretty vast audience. So I always tell our guests, I kind of preface it, you could stay as high level as you want, or you can get into the weeds. And this is really your opportunity to kind of share your story with our audience. And now with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you along with the video camera.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, my background is I'm a 7-year pancreatic cancer survivor. My doctor only guaranteed me 2 years with the surgery that I had, and obviously it's much better than that. So, my case is kind of uncommon. Um, well, I was first told to get my affairs in order by a local physician in the Twin Cities area. And my husband and I decided we would go to the Mayo Clinic. I ended up finding the surgeon that was, I'm told, the best in the world for the type of pancreatic cancer I had. And he drove my healing and recovery from the standpoint of all the medical. Um, so here I am 7 years later and living pretty normally, high quality of life. I do have an insulin pump. I have a glucose monitor that does help me kind of live like I have a pancreas, which that is what's different about me is I had a pancreatectomy. So they removed my pancreas, my gallbladder, the first part of my intestine, um, my spleen. So, so a lot of changes to my digestion. So I have to say that my recovery was hell because every time I would eat, I would feel sick. So, I ended up turning to uh, medical marijuana in order to calm myself, my insides down so that I could actually eat and do, just go through the healing process. So it was a very good experience with me after that, just letting my body heal. But it took me easily a year to feel like I was back to normal. Um, so yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I was in IT for 30 plus years. Most recently, in the last 3 years, I was laid off from my job and wrote my book called Hope for an Outstanding Outcome. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can buy it electronically or in print. And I go under the pen name of Rita Ann. The reason I wrote that book is so many people told me that my story gave them hope. So after you hear that a number of times, you start to think, I should probably write something. And I've always honestly wanted to write. So this was an opportunity for me to do that. I also give away backpacks to pancreatic cancer survivors. Or I shouldn't say survivors. Really, it is anybody that's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. They can reach out to me and I will send them a backpack. It's on my website, ritaann.org. But it's a survival pack. I include my book in there for free, various things that you can use, a journal, a pen, a water bottle, the things that you use when you're in the hospital or going through these types of things. So, um, at any rate, it's a sling bag and you can use it as a backpack. So it's kind of I picked a olive green or a like a army drab olive color so that it would be kind of universally accepted.
We know how difficult it can be to get a quality rest when you're facing a health challenge or the daily stresses of caregiving. Because of that, we started a partnership with Sound Oasis. They were kind enough to donate some of their high-tech sleep therapy masks for use in a select number of Blankets of Hope care packages. Because they are incredible at blocking out light and helping the mind relax, we know they will be a great help to those patients. For anyone else who'd like to get one for themselves, you can head over to soundoasis.com and use the code PURPLE. You'll get 10% off your order and free shipping anywhere in the continental US. The best part is that Sound Oasis is donating 20% of the price back to Project Purple to help us fund research and patient aid. It's a great way to support the cause and your own health at the same time. That's code PURPLE at soundoasis.com.
I always viewed my journey as a battle. So I always felt like I was battling for my life, and I was a warrior and a soldier, and I do believe I'm a soldier in the army of Christ. So it really that visual way of looking at it for me was helpful to keep my mind focused on healing and doing all the things that I could do to be positive and healthy and do what I can, in my in my body, soul, spirit, to embrace healing. And I tried to keep people around me that were positive and people that could speak good words into my life. So from my perspective, words bring life or death, and I wanted words of life and healing spoken over me. So that's kind of how I walked through this. My book is written to anyone. Um, it's I tried to stay away from so much of my ideology. However, it's a part of me. And so I try to make it so that anyone could read it. Even if you look at it from the perspective of the caregiver, I had my husband write a chapter, or in each of the chapters, he wrote his perspective on that time in our life and what he was dealing with as a caregiver. So I have takeaways so people can kind of process what they're going through in each chapter. It talks about, what can you do now type of thing. So that's kind of my the direction I've been going with my life is try to help people. As I got out of IT, now I'm doing something I never thought I would do. I'm working in a school district. So I started doing that as a paraprofessional, making quite a lot less money than I used to make, I have to say, but it's very rewarding. And now I became the administrator for special education locally, where we're living now. So that's pretty much my story. I come from a big family and um, lived in this area most of my life.
We're going to
So.
rewind that a bit because I'm here taking notes. There's so many great things here. So, all right, let's go back to the very beginning. So you're saying 7 years, so we're 2025, end of 25. So this was probably around 2018, 2017, where you were first diagnosed. Is that right?
Yes, March 1st of 2018.
Okay. So signs, symptoms, like what was going on?
Okay. Well, what started happening is I started itching all over my body.
Yeah.
Like, and we had just moved 5 months prior into this new home. We haven't even fully unpacked yet. And I started itching. And of course, my first thought is, what changed?
Yeah.
Did I start using some different laundry detergent, or
Yeah.
is the water different here? Or
Yeah.
so yeah, that was the start of the whole process.
So when you say itching, so this is important here, and I thank you for sharing that. Just so the for the audience, because I mean, this is like the frustrating piece from a patient advocate. The signs and symptoms are all so vague, right? There's not like, well, the jaundice piece, everybody is always like, oh, light bulb, like you turn yellow. Um, and the frustrating thing, not fascinating, but frustrating thing is that there's no tumor to feel, right? It's unlike a breast cancer where you can feel a lump, or, a melanoma, you can see, something going on, or testicular cancer where men can feel, something going on. So it's not as if you could feel the cancer. The one that I think is the light bulb moment, as we just said, is the yellowing, right? And that's like typically kind of the one that I think people definitely associate with pancreatic cancer. But itchiness, like rashes, like that could be anything, to your point. Like you just moved. It could even be dietary, right? Like people could have allergic reactions and just have, hives or something, and that could cause very similar symptoms. So when you say itchiness, was it a prolonged like 2 weeks, or was it just a couple days and then you were like, hey, I don't know, maybe I should get this checked out?
Uh, I think it was a few days that I noticed. I'm pretty self-aware of stuff like that, so I try to be proactive. But it wasn't a rash. There was no rash. It was just itchiness, which was really odd in
Mm,
itself. So I went to the doctor, my primary, and she said, "Go home and put some lotion on. Your skin is dry."
yeah.
And so I was like, "Well, no, I don't think so." But she said, "Come back in a week." So I did. And in the day where you could get your appointment in a week. And then they started doing blood tests. And then they noticed that there was something, they told me I was diabetic, which
Oh,
I
wow.
do not come from a family of diabetics. And they also then kept doing the blood tests. So they started talking to me about that. This is all in one appointment. And then they came back with more blood tests saying your liver levels are off. There's something wrong.
So the deeper dive, they start to realize like, hey, things aren't adding up here from a diagnostic standpoint where you should be baseline. The diabetes piece, so I know that is interesting. So did you know? Like, I mean, and these are all hindsight questions, right? So these I call these loaded questions, Rita. Like they're
Mhm.
loaded. We know the answers, and it's not the purpose of the exercise is not to like beat ourselves up, but just to kind of inform. So did you know, like, if they said, "Hey, you're diabetic," did you realize, like, oh yeah, maybe that's why I was like lethargic? I know di diabetics like sometimes have these spikes in energy. They have a lot of, you could have a lot of issues, depending on where your sugar levels are. So did some other stuff start to make sense after you realized that they were telling you, "Hey, you're diabetic"?
Well, I don't know. No, I wasn't really familiar with diabetes at all because I never
Yeah.
had to
Well,
be.
yeah, if you're not, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I
And yeah, so none of those symptoms were obvious to me, but it probably more than likely was happening. But
Yeah, which I'm sure you have maybe read this recently, like in the last couple years coming out of COVID. I mean, I know they've talked about people that are healthy, not overweight, don't have diabetes in their family, and become diabetic over 40, but
hmm
don't have that history or don't have any chronic health conditions that would cause the diabetes to occur as maybe
hmm
a precursor to pancreatic cancer. So it's just kind of interesting that you mentioned that as well. Once they do some diagnostics, that, that was like a flag that went off potentially, from a diagnostic standpoint that something wasn't right. And there's no, again, history or health wise. Um, so you go through that battery of tests, and then where do they come up to and say, all right, let's do like a CT or an ultrasound or an MRI? Where does that come into the conversation?
I ended up going and having an ultrasound done within 3 days. I mean, that the other
Wow.
part of it is so amazing how quickly I was able to get in and get all this done. So within 3 days, I did an ultrasound. They couldn't see anything. And then maybe another 3 days, I went and had a MRI done.
Hmm.
And then I think maybe even the same day, but I can't remember, I had the CT scan done. So it was it was pretty fast, meaning I would say within 2 to 3 weeks, I was diagnosed.
Wow. And this was all with that first doctor who was like, "Hey, this is bad. Get your affairs in order." And,
Yes.
did the first doctor give you staging? Like, did they say like where you were in a staging process, or did they just kind of like just give you like, "Hey, here's your orders and take them or leave them," kind of thing?
Uh, well, she was she was my primary. She wasn't as familiar. They were setting things up with surgeons and oncology, not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
But at the time, that's what was happening in the background. And she told me, that the tumor was the size of the tip of my pinky, and that they would have to do surgery and remove it. And that was basically it. And of course, I'm like, okay, get it out of me.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want this in me. And what ended up happening was by some fluke, I ended up seeing the surgeon first, who was surprised that I haven't seen oncology. And then I was like, well, why would I see oncology? They haven't even gone in and sampled the tumor to let me know that it's cancerous. And he said, well, more than 80% of tumors in the pancreas area are.
Yeah.
And so I was in a doctor's office at that time, becoming aware that I more than likely had a cancerous tumor. And it was the first I had heard of it. So it was very traumatic, to be honest. But I
Yeah,
can't
it seems
imagine.
like poorly. I mean, again, hindsight's 2020, and when I say this, I mean that as a, again, patient advocate, it seems kind of poorly managed, I guess, from your general practitioner, right? Like
Yeah.
not having that conversation to say, "Hey, Rita, let's sit down. Like, there's something suspicious there, and you really need to go see a clinical oncologist or medical oncologist, medical oncologist or surgical oncologist, or go see a team."
Yeah.
to, further understand this versus, hey, you're hearing it from a surgeon, like, hey, go see the surgeon. Oh, it's cancer. But, and I don't, statistics are funny because there's a lot of people with cysts. There's a very large piece of the population with cysts, which are
Hmm.
tumors, right? Like they're benign tumors. Um, in the world on their pancreas. A lot of people don't know that they have them. So, like, I don't know if that number is accurate. And I always kind of question the data behind that, like if that is the case. But I guess like, and that's the point here is like, again, hindsight's 2020, but this was like poorly managed, right? And so this guy telling you that information, I don't know, does he really know that information? I guess because he's a surgeon. So we, as lay people, we assume that surgeons know everything, which they don't, or we're medical
Right.
oncologists. And I'm not saying that like the point of me saying that is you've got to be, as you said, your biggest advocate and you got to like manage
Mhm.
that piece. And
Right.
like you can't rely on the systems. Like your story really quick here is like how poorly mismanaged it was. Again, not beating the decisions up or trying to, put a negative slant on this is, but like this is something that we as patient advocates are really passionate about of just really having to advocate for ourselves. And people have to understand that regardless of where you're treated, you've got to advocate for yourself because no one's going to advocate for you. And you got to
Mhm.
ask the right questions and build that, which we're going to get into, as you mentioned, that support system and do certain things. I truly believe in order to really get ahead of this thing. So back to the timeline here, you have that conversation with the surgeon, and then does that lead then to going to Mayo and finding the specialist at Mayo?
Um, Actually, kind of, that was the direction we were headed. I mean, we talked about it on the way home that day. Um, However, we ended up doing is because the reason the itching started was because the bile duct was
Was
blocked.
blocked, yeah. So I probably had to put a
So
stent in, right?
yes, so locally we went in and had that done, had a stent put in.
Yep.
They sampled I always forget the term, but sorry, they t sampled the tumor, and
Yep.
then by March 1st I was diagnosed. So
They
this all
probably did an
started,
MRCP, which is the where they do that fine needle biopsy, but they also have the
yes.
ability then to go in and put the stent in there so that they can take
Yep.
care of the blockage.
Yep. Yeah, so they actually diagnosed me. I honestly didn't believe it until I sent the biopsy down to me. So,
Yeah.
but it was interesting. It was an interesting journey. So we went to Mayo after we had to go through the process of submitting my information to Mayo.
Hmm.
So all my medical records went down there, and then I found out or understood that they actually don't, they wouldn't have taken me on as a patient had they not had a better course of treatment.
Yep.
So thankfully they believed they had a better course of treatment, and that's where it all started.
And do you feel comfortable mentioning the doctor's name at Mayo? I think I know who it is, but I won't mention his name unless you mention his name.
Oh, definitely. I love my doctor, Dr. Mark Trudy.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. Yeah. And Mark lost his dad to pancreatic cancer, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He's a phenomenal human being and he's a wonderful surgeon. I think he's a better person than surgeon. That just I think says a lot. And we've had plenty of podcast guests that have been treated by Dr. Trudy, believe it or not. We even had someone on the podcast a couple years ago who during COVID was diagnosed here in Connecticut and would drive to Mayo to see Dr. Trudy. And then Trudy eventually did his surgeon and then
Wow.
he would drive back and forth. He just didn't feel comfortable going on planes, um, which at the time, whatever. But he made it work. And yeah, Mark is a phenomenal human being and an amazing surgeon. So I think the other piece of this too Rita, and we talk about this often as an advocacy standpoint. It's amazing that you have access to a wonderful facility right there, right? Like Mayo, like it's drivable. And that's something that I know has changed. I mean, in 15 years, we've been doing this 15 years. So I think some centers have gotten, there's more centers of excellence now, and there's surgeons and
Mhm.
oncologists throughout the country spread around. But not everybody has that ability, right? And so I always tell patients when they call in and, if they're in the Minnesota area, you got to go to Mayo, like even if it's just to kick the tires and reconfirm to your point, like they're probably not going to do the case unless they know they can do something that would benefit the patient. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so that's where I always tell patients, like if you're in the Boston area, if you can get to one of the major centers there, Mass General or Dana. If you're in New York, take your pick of the three, the three big centers that are there, or even now in Connecticut, we've got some great clinicians here in the state of Connecticut. Whereas I think 15 years ago, there were only like a handful of places, Mayo, MD Anderson, maybe UCLA out on the West Coast, Johns Hopkins, and then Mass General Hospital. Now there's a lot of places in some major metropolitan areas, which is great. But Mayo's a phenomenal, you know, center for pancreatic cancer. They're one of the best. So it's awesome that you were able to get there very quickly. And it's in your backyard.
Yeah. Right. I think that's one of the things that was so caused me to be so successful was the quickness at which everything came together. Because I've heard several people that have, you know, gone in, done tests,
Yeah.
and hadn't had that quick of a turnaround. So I am grateful. Somebody was looking out for me. Let's just say I believe God was looking out for me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean to get they call Mark Trudy the Dragon Slayer of pancreatic cancer, and that was very visually tying into my way I see things. So
Yeah.
it all came together. I mean,
It's
if you could say it was a perfect storm, I guess that's what I would call it.
a little bit of divine intervention, if
Yes, exactly.
So Mayo then comes back and they go with this surgery. So do you know going into like treatment, do you do chemo or do they just say, hey, listen, I think your best candidate is like complete removal of the pancreas. You're going to become a diabetic and you'll deal with all that stuff and, the Whipple and everything else that you'll deal with digestively. But was that the initial plan, or what do they offer like chemotherapy at the time and then surgery? And then at some point they were like, all right, let's just take the pancreas out and give you like the best option moving forward.
Uh, I I don't know if the plan was to take the pancreas out and at the beginning of
Hmm.
this, but it I think, Dr. Trudy being who he is, when in doubt, take it out,
Yeah.
I think he just wanted to make sure I was successful. And personally, I sometimes have a hard time reading some of these blogs where people are interacting and sharing information, and maybe they've had the Whipple, and it just sounds like there's a lot of cases where people have a Whipple and then they end up not having gotten it all. And then they have to go back in for another surgery or chemo or whatever the case may be. But I did start off with chemo. And I always struggle with saying the name, but the drug was Florinox or something like
Yep.
that.
Florinox. Yeah. The kitchen sink of, I think it's the nickname is the kitchen sink of chemo is because of the toxicity and
Yeah,
the devastation that it causes on patients. Not a lot of
yeah,
patients tolerate it very well.
yeah. And he said I was young enough, strong enough. He thought I could deal with it. My body would, come back from it. I also did something they kept telling me not to do. It was something I felt strongly about. I Wednesday night I would stop eating and I'd drink water, just fluids, until I got chemo on Friday morning. So I was going through that process of fasting prior to going through the chemo, and everyone that saw me while I was going through chemo said, "You look great. I can't believe you look as good as you do," because they knew was going through a barrage of
Yeah.
drugs going into my system. And and then after let's see, March through roughly June um, was the chemo, and then I started radiation after that for about a month, and then I had to wait a month for my surgery to try to
So
kind
you
of get
ran
my, yeah,
so
go
you
ahead.
ran the gamut though, like chemo, radiation, and then surgery, which I
Yeah,
know like typically there's some data around radiation pre-surgery because it actually toughens up some of the pancreas and also zaps up anything that might be remaining, any cells that they don't necessarily see on any diagnostic test. Um, so going into the surgery, were you under the assumption like, hey, it's a Whipple, it's going to take out a little bit, or was it like, hey, I think we're good to take this out given your age and your health, like this is giving you the best chance long-term survival?
right. That's what I do remember is that I knew this going in, and that he would be taking out the pancreas. And the interesting thing is, we ended up seeing him months after, while I was recovering, on one of the local news stations talking about a patient that he had where it was the first time he had ever taken out the tumor and it was dead.
Mhm.
And that was
Yeah.
me. I found out after we went back in to talk to him. I knew it was dead when he pulled it out, but I wasn't 100% sure he was talking about me. So, um, but yeah, that apparently is not a common thing based on what he was talking about. So,
I've heard some stories from some surgeons that sometimes, like when they're dead, or I think that I don't know if they call them necrotic, but they peel, like the tumors will peel right off of the pancreas,
hmm,
meaning like they don't adhere to the pancreas, which is kind of a fascinating thing because you would think like I don't know, it's kind of whenever I see slides from scientists and you see like tentacles, like the tumors are almost like it's like the ball, but it has all these tentacles that go out, right? And that they adhere, and that's kind of how the tumor is presented on slides, but it just may be like a cross section of how it looks potentially. I've never actually seen a live, I've seen pictures, I guess, but that also looks like a ball. It's kind of hard to distinguish. I mean, other than the coloring. But yeah, that's kind of fascinating. So you go through this process and then post surgery, you just are recovery. There's no extra chemo or anything like that.
correct. Yep.
But the recovery, though, you go from, hey, I'm not diabetic now. And I guess the term, I don't know if this has been mentioned to you, I guess is like brittle diabetic is what they call people without a pancreas because of, you're causing now diabetes, and you become a brittle diabetic and just have to really watch everything now because you don't have a pancreas to control that. So how was I know you mentioned like the recovery was tough. You used the term hell. Um, I know we've had
Well, it
people,
wasn't fun,
yeah,
to
I
be
know
honest.
we've had people. I mean, the Whipple is a wild surgery because I think I've read it's like one of the top three most complex surgeries. And, not only from an anatomy standpoint, but then actually from the surgery. Here, you're actually removing your pancreas. So now you've got to deal with that whole,
Yeah.
situation, which we've mentioned the diabetes. But then
Hmm.
also the plumbing gets rewired, right? Like the whole plumbing changes.
Yep.
And you
True.
lose your gallbladder as well. I'm assuming they took that
Yep.
out as well.
Yes.
And so that plumbing, and just think of the healing time that takes. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say like up to a year, 2 years to be fully healed,
Hmm.
from even the incision and, God forbid if there's any types of complications. I think that the Whipples, the rate of like infection and issues post has gotten better, but there, it's still a really big surgery and there's a lot of complexity of the repiping of the whole digestive tract. So, was there a tipping point in that recovery that you can remember that you were like, okay, I think we're through this? Or was it kind of like this roller coaster of just trying to get your body back to normal and your digestive tract and figure out like being a diabetic now for the first time ever in your life and having to deal with that situation as well with this whole reworking of your whole digestive tract?
I would say. I, it was about, gosh, I'm trying to think, it was almost a year, let's say 10 months after that. I remember feeling pretty normal. I wouldn't say I was 100%, but it was kind of a turning point for me. My husband and I made plans with a couple. We went to Door County over in Wisconsin on Lake Michigan. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a beautiful vacation area. And we went fishing for salmon on the lake. And I was kind of not sure that I was going to be okay in a boat like that with all that surgery just having happened. But um, that I think was my turning point, was just knowing that, okay, I can do this. I was getting back to normal for me. And of course, uh, I think what helped me get through this whole process is I'm a very tenacious person and very persistent, and I have a can-do-it attitude, and just pressing on and trying to set goals for myself to, okay, I'm going to do this now. And it just gave me something to look forward to and just look beyond all the as we're healing as patients, all the misery you're going through.
Yeah.
So keeping in mind, I know I said it was hell. I've never ever had surgery prior to any of this. This was my first ever
First
surgery.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and I appreciate the honesty, and I have some questions here left, but I just go back to the whole kind of background journey. I think it's important. I mean, there's a reality to this cancer, that I think if you haven't been touched by pancreatic cancer is a lot different than a lot of cancers.
Mhm.
And to your point, like it's hell, but you got through it, right? And I think that's the most important thing here is that, especially for those watching or listening on the other side, given the struggles you experienced in the beginning, from just the diagnostic standpoint and getting to the right place, and thank God you got to that right place. And then, from the standpoint of just the journey itself of, the complications in that journey, but the fortunate thing here, you said you're super positive. I always try to look at the positives, right? Because we could spend all day looking at negatives and that doesn't get us anywhere. You were
Right.
the 1 in 5,
Hmm.
right? 1 in 5 are eligible for surgery.
Right.
We've got to do better to change that, but like that's a huge, huge freaking positive. And my dad was 1 in 5, right? Now, his journey was different post, but like I think that's something that, like from my perspective here as the listener and the host, no one ever said it was easy, and no one's ever come on this podcast and said, "Oh, this was easy. It's like riding a bike." You got your proof and inspiration that you got through it, and
Right.
most important piece here. Um, Couple of questions here for you, and I've got a ton of them here. Given your age, and I know this was back in, you're kind of in that it's like a Mendoza line, and where I'm going with this, and what I mean by that is like genetics, family history and genetics. Like I know Mayo's like at the top of the game. I'm sure at some point maybe that was done. Is there anything genetics or family history, like given your age? Did they ever talk about that? And when I say Mendoza line, I think like 2018 or maybe 2019, the NIH like required all cancer centers to do genetic testing for pancreatic cancer. I know Mayo was kind of ahead of the curve because there was a scientist there at Mayo who, Gloria Peterson, who's unfortunately no longer here. She passed away a couple years ago, but she had one of the largest registries in the entire world of pancreas, genetic cases. But was genetics ever part of the conversation, or you ever do genetic testing? Do you remember?
Um, oh gosh. I can't even remember at this point. However, I know friends that have done genetic testing because their family members have had pancreatic cancer.
Yeah,
But there was no genetic findings that matched what they weren't they didn't have the gene that would say I have pancreatic cancer or
yeah,
I
yeah.
have the opportunity to have pancreatic cancer. So I don't know a lot about that, but I guess the people that I have talked to, it doesn't sound like it's a exacting process at this point, but I don't know.
And family history, no family history. I know you said you didn't have any surgeries, but family history with GI cancers, I guess.
Well, I have a brother that he was next in line. I come from a family of 10 kids.
Oh, wow.
I was number nine, he was number eight. And he, he did get cancer. He was out of state. He was in Arizona. Um, he didn't go in right away. Uh, so there is a possibility that his cancer may have started there, but
Yeah.
I just don't know.
So nothing definitive. Not there's
No,
nothing
uh-uh.
nothing in your parents, grandparents.
My mom ended in a really odd way, I think this happened. My mom was 93, I believe, when she died a few years back, and she ended up developing pancreatic cancer at the end of her life.
Wow.
So I that was how she ended up dying. She it took her life because it was like, well, how do you fight pancreatic cancer at 93?
Yeah, she lived a long, hopefully joyous life at 93. I mean, not that it
Yeah.
makes it okay, but like I think yeah, options wise, it's tough. Um That's fascinating. I mean, I would think someone would want to do some genetic testing. Not that I mean, it's just kind of interesting. I mean, we are heavily involved in that genetic piece, and I know like more and more as science evolves, like we're starting to learn that, some of these cancers are genetic. But unless you have like a strong family history, like I guess the analogy is like, well, it was something in the water, with the family, potentially, maybe environmental or, who knows? Like that's just throwing, darts on the board.
Mhm.
Um, Something else that just recently has come up, and I know you've mentioned faith, which we're going to talk about in a second, but from an activity standpoint, were you active, exercise before, during, post? Like, did that play any part of your journey?
So funny that you should ask. So, so I had lost weight. I was doing at the time they called it the Beachbody diet,
Yep.
and I was doing like cardio weights
Uh-huh.
3 times a week. At the time that I got diagnosed, it was like right after I was drinking the shakes and everything, doing the protein versus staying away from all the sugars. So I was eating super healthy for like several years prior to this happening. And so it doesn't seem to matter. Sometimes I just wonder if it's, stress that we put on our bodies in other
Yeah.
ways potentially.
Yeah, where I was maybe going to go with this is so there was some recent data about exercise, and exercise is the broader definition here with cancer patients and recovery and the benefits of exercise for cancer patients. There was a large study that just was published, and they talked about that. And I know a lot of superhumans come on the podcast and talk about, and again, exercise is the broad definition. It's not like, hey, we're going to, Planet Fitness and, we're lifting heavy weights or, it could be what's relative at that time. But
Mhm.
just leading an active lifestyle is, I think, the term that I like to use. Like some people have talked about, like, hey, I was doing hot yoga, 5 days a week before I got diagnosed. And then, through my treatments, not necessarily being able to get to a yoga studio, but just, spending 20, 30 minutes a day doing poses in my house. Or, we had someone on and, they were an avid runner and they continued the run not to the volume that they were doing, prior to being diagnosed, but still
Mhm.
being as active as possible within, the confines. So that term exercise is kind of broad and not necessarily defined as I think like as people would interpret like I think people think exercise and they think like, hey, you're going to group classes. We even had people that just a lady recently, she talked about, Peloton. Like she jumps on the Peloton and she does, a lot of stuff on her own at whatever, endurance that she
Yeah.
has at the time. But again, I think just trying to be active in whatever way possible during, treatments and recovery. Again, the data suggests that that does help. patients long term in terms of survival. And we've had people, again, like I said, just come on and talk about that. So that's where I was kind of going with the activity standpoint.
Yeah, so while I was going through all this, I was so focused on keeping it together that I
Yeah,
was, more so taking walks. I ended up getting a dog, a small Papillon. He's
awesome.
my little lifesaver. So I ended up taking walks and taking the dog for walks and keeping myself active that way. But then I just wanted to add, after I had recovered, it was probably a couple years or so later, I started doing resistance training.
Mm,
So it was really good for my muscles to just
yeah.
get myself back in shape. I did machines at a gym, had a personal trainer that would work with a group of us. But it was great to just get my muscles back to where they had been. Um, but I'm currently not doing that anymore, but it was a good thing to do.
It's great. Um, Next question, and I know you mentioned this, but let's talk a little bit about faith. Um, and how that assisted you through, this journey and talk a little bit more about that. I know a lot of people come on and I have a lot of terms that I say, and I guess this isn't a rabbit hole, but like we talk about a lot of subjects. I mean, there's not like you mentioned the medical marijuana. We've talked about that countless times. I don't think we're here to judge, and we're not doctors. I'll preface that. Everybody needs to kind of do their own research and talk to their own specialist about what is best for them. But faith is something that I've seen, and eventually we'll put out some data because it's super fascinating. I think people who have thrived through this, I know you went through hell, but I think as we talked about before, like you're here, it's inspiring, and you're
Mhm.
living, and to me, that's thriving. And I think that there's some tenets that we've seen in people, and as I said in the beginning, like this is about sharing what helped you, and faith you mentioned a bunch of times, and we've heard faith a lot regardless of what your faith is. It could be Judaism, Buddhism, atheist, Roman Catholic, Protestant, Lutheran, it does not matter. But people have Greek Orthodox. I should have a list of all of them listed. We'll work on that for the next time that question comes up. But um, regardless of that faith, it doesn't matter. But I know it helps superhumans get through that journey. So let's talk a little bit about that for you. Were you
Mhm.
someone that went to church or worship beforehand, or was it something you picked up during that time frame? And there's not
Well,
judging. I'm just
no,
again, I'm
no,
sharing.
no, not at all. So I've been a Christian since 92. And so I had been a Christian believer, following Christ. That's how I mean, Christians get a bad name. So let's call it a Christ follower.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that since 92. And I really truly believe that, even though God is the author of all good, bad things can happen to us. And I truly believe that God wants to do good with it in our lives, and he'll take the bad. We live in a fallen world, and that's what it talks about in Genesis, in the Bible, is that Adam and Eve, they sinned and they ruined it for everybody. So we live in a fallen world, and I do believe that though God does work for our benefit, so I believe He's increased my faith, increased my ability to manage through crisis. He's taken these things that were horrible in my life, and I use them to, give other people a hand up. um, it's all, I believe, sometimes in how you receive it. I'm receiving it from the perspective that I believe that God does work for the good of those that are called according to his purposes. So, and I'm trying to do my best, to do what he wants me to do. And how walked through my healing was, you know, every step I took, I was prayerfully seeking God, what should I do? Is this the direction? And if doors were opening, I believed that He was opening them, and the whole thing with Trudy, I mean, that story in itself, I set up an appointment. I knew who I wanted to see. I knew about him, but I really felt it sensed in my spirit that I was not to ask for him, and I did not ask for him. I got a doctor uh, set up for me to go see. I got to the room. I worked with Jessica Mitchell, my nurse of oncology nurse that I worked with throughout the whole process. And in the room that first day, the man that I was supposed to see ended up calling in sick. Within 5 minutes, she had Dr. Trudy in my office with me, and he was my doctor from that point forward. So that in itself was okay, God's with me. I know He's with me, and He's just going to keep stepping me through this. So, I mean, that's just a little piece of how my story went. Um,
So powerful. I mean, again, like I was raised Roman Catholic, and I am deeply rooted in my faith. I do not practice weekly. And I don't think, just personally, I don't think that I don't think you need to go. This is just me talking here. You know, need to go to a church or a synagogue or wherever you people worship to be like a faithful person. That's just my opinion. I mean, I'm sure that the church or churches have different opinions,
mhm,
but I think, you know, there is something about faith that's very important when you go through this journey. And again, as I said before, the people that have really, really done well and had really good outcomes with this thing called pancreatic cancer have a strongly, deeply rooted faith in whoever they believe in. And I think that's really important. Um, and you know, the one thing with life is I think people have this notion that we're here forever and we're not.
mm,
Right? And tomorrow's never guaranteed. But when you go through something like this, that it has like this very like life altering, um, you know, it's important to have faith and have support and have those things around you because that is really going to be a big difference maker. So I appreciate you sharing that story. I got the chills just hearing that and just, you know, again, fortuitous divine intervention, you know, things happen for a reason. We may never know um, why they happen, but
mhm.
they really do happen for a reason sometimes. I've got a couple questions left. We're going to share where our audience can connect. The book, and I don't want to give away the book because I want people to be intrigued enough to go buy the book themselves here. This is part of the podcast as well. But like, where, I guess, look, what question about the book is like, when in the journey did you say, hey, I know you mentioned, you know, you got laid off and, you know, everything kind of, and then was it that point that you said, hey, I've got this time. I've always wanted to write this. Let's do this. Or was there a point like in the journey, like when you were in that hell and you were like, hey, I'm going to write a book if I get out of this? I know we've had people come on that we do a lot of running. And I had one guy say he was sitting in recovery and, you know, he told his wife he was going to run a marathon if he survived the Whipple. The wife thought he was just, you know, goofy on, you know, the anesthesia, but he really meant it. And he ended up running like, you know, 6 marathons after that, you know. But so the thought of the book, when did that come into play?
Uh, I think it was um, after I had gone through all of the treatment and surgery and then started talking to people. And I started getting on social media. People would reach out to me. I was talking to people from all over the United States about either their loved ones or their current experience, and they just wanted to hear from me, like, what did you do, or what was different about you that you're a survivor? Once I started talking to people, I would have that feedback of your story gives me hope. You know, that's amazing. That's an incredible story. I think it was at that point I thought, okay, this, it's like, here's my sign. So I really gotta write a book. Um, that was when it pretty much happened. I feel like when I was walking through all these therapies, I was just swinging my sword, is trying to make it through another day. But then after the battle, I that was when I started, just sharing my story with people, and that was really where it developed.
Were you a writer beforehand?
Not really. I wrote in high school. I never went to college. I went straight from working into IT. I kind of transitioned from one role to another in a corporation and corporate America. And so I never went to college. But I had those strong roots in writing, and I read a lot. So I'm an avid reader. So I kind of had an idea of how I wanted to put it together, but I really credit this to God because I personally, everybody has said that anybody can read this book and get hope out of it. So
Awesome.
I've not spent a lot of time, on the whole marketing aspect of it. My whole purpose, honestly, was to be able to put my book in my backpack so that I can encourage somebody else that's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. That was my whole goal. And if something more comes of it, great.
Yeah,
Um, so
it's
that's
awesome. I love it. I
yeah,
love it. Turning a real crappy situation into a positive and finding light at the end of the tunnel and trying to pay it forward is like what every human being in the world, not even the country, should strive for every day, right? Think about if everybody had that intention, how better the world would be,
exactly
right?
right.
So we need more of it. Second to last question here, and the last two are loaded in the sense that there's no right or wrong. I call them loaded because they're thought-provoking. Not that there's like a trick to it or anything. But given your experience and what you went through, what advice would you give someone watching or listening to this, like that just got a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, given your experience?
Um, I pretty much cover this in my book, but I would have to say
Go to the book. That's the best answer. Read the book. No.
the most important piece, though, I really do believe is to have that circle around you of people that um, you know, are solid individuals that they'll give you good godly advice. They'll lift you up when you're down. You have to have that. I call it in my book the tribe, my tribe, that I knew I could count on to do all the right things for me, and they were there when I needed them. And they were, again, speaking positive words over me and not, oh, poor Rita, you know, and going the other direction with it. They had to, I mean, pancreatic cancer, as you said, I was one in five, that get the surgery. And at that time, I think the survival rate was 5% or something like that. And now
Wow.
I think it's around 14, 12, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I really needed people that could believe for a miracle, really. I mean, when you look at those kind of percentages, you need people around you that can really believe for you and help you through it. So that's my advice is people and community and your tribe. That is who's going to get you through it because you can't do this alone. People don't do great things without other people lifting them up. So that's
Yeah, that right there is like the nail on the head because I think we are so fixated on like I just saw fascinating data like how negative like all the social media is like these short format videos for like people's mental health. But I've said this for a long time. No one does anything great with by themselves. Like go through history. I relate a lot to sports. Like you think of Michael Jordan, like he had like some of the best trainers. Now all these guys have their own books, right? Everybody thinks, and he had some of the best teammates in the world, right? Like at
Right.
that time. So like, and you can go through and we could throw world leaders, celebrity. Well, so I don't like celebrities, but like whatever, they're actors. But like athletes that achieve these things and people, even some of the great scientists, they always have, these discoveries they make. It's in their lab. They're not the actual person probably pushing the test tube, the beak, the syringes into the test tubes. Someone's in there helping them.
Yeah.
Great piece there. So thank you for sharing that. My last question here, and then we're going to share where our audience can connect. Again, loaded question, no right or wrong, but your answer to this. How do you define the term pancreatic cancer given your journey?
Gosh, it's, that's a big question. Um,
That's why we save it for last.
it's an evil beast of a disease. It really is. And, you know, it's I think some of the hardest things about it is that people's expectations about it, doctors practicing their medicine and seeing results. I mean, they only know what they see. So there's expectations on how people are going to respond, and um, it's widely known as a very fatal disease. And I think some of what is difficult about it is just that you're battling back those opinions, those thought processes. Not only are you dealing with your physical body and all that you're trying to, you know, battle through, you're battling people's opinion and thoughts and experience with it. So, it's a tough one that way. And like you've said in the beginning of this, you have to be your own best advocate. Um, throughout the process, Dr. Trudy would tell me nothing's changed. And I would go home crying. And then I'd be like, wait a minute, God told me I'm going to have a miraculous, healing. And I keep expecting it to happen. And every time I go into his office, he says, nothing's changed. So it's like you have to really step out there beyond all of that and just keep pressing on. No matter what people say, you got to keep pressing on and do the best you can and putting one step foot in front of the other. And it's like any journey in life. It's not the only difficulties people walk through, but you do the best you can with it, and just keep doing what you believe is the right thing to do. And sometimes people don't agree with you, like my fasting, for example.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful though, Rita, because you are proof that doing all those things works, right? And that's the thing I
Right.
think that, is so powerful with your story. So, last thing here for someone watching, listening, and maybe they want to read the book, where's the best place for people to go find information about the book, connect with you? I know you mentioned Instagram. You mentioned the book, and I know before you mentioned you have a website, Amazon, I think you mentioned, or other places. So where would be the best place for people to connect and also buy the book or get the book, I should say?
Um, so you can go to my website. It's Rita, Rita, Ann.org. And that's my first and middle name. And it links you out to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I actually, I have Facebook and I've got Instagram that I keep up with. And I actually, to start this process, I started writing blogs. So I've
Cool.
tried to categorize my blogs so you can go look for specific things if you need, direction on one thing or another. But I can't say that I'm 100% because it's a one person show. I basically
Yeah.
take care of all of it myself. So, but yeah, ritaann.org is the best place to go, and that's where I have a page dedicated to my survival packs, is what I call them. And if somebody wanted to request that for a loved one or for themselves that have been diagnosed, you just fill out a form and it gets to me.
Awesome. Rita, thank you so much for allowing us to share your journey with pancreatic cancer here on the Project Purple podcast. It's been an honor.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to people and get my word out there about my story.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast and hopefully watching it on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to that YouTube channel and make sure to follow us wherever you listen to the podcast. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Till next time, please be safe. Thanks for listening.